Hi, this is Dr. Saldivar with another episode of the Way to College podcast. I love the podcast. I love for what it has allowed me to share and to bring into this world. Um, I'm especially grateful to the folks that I've met throughout this journey, particularly those who have been outside of my network originally. One of those gentlemen has been Carlos Cardenas, and then a couple of folks sort of adjacent or in the same field as him because Carlos did a wonderful job of connecting me to a number of people who he thought would be excellent guests on the podcast, and a number of them have agreed, graciously agreed, um, and so I'm grateful to him, and because without his help, I don't know that today's conversation would be happening. So what I'm going to do before we get started is I'm going to allow my guest to introduce himself. So Ben, would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners out there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my name is Ben Yzaguirre. I'm the Vice President of Education and Conferences at the School Nutrition Association.
So, Ben, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I when you introduce yourself, so I immediately want to know more about your work, and but I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna wait, be patient because as with all of my guests, Ben, I always want to start with their educational journey, and because I think our educational journey plays such a significant role in sort of laying out our path for us. Um, and so, Ben, if you had to go back and think about where is the starting point for your own educational journey, where would that starting point be?
I have to say, I love this question. It's so simple, but it can take you in a variety of directions. I listened to some of your previous guests and how they grappled with this, and where do I define the beginning of my journey? Where do I define the pathway? Is it at this point in my professional career? Is it at this point in my formal education process? Is it something that happened outside of my personal life that kind of influenced how things go? And so for background purposes, you provide this question beforehand. You let me grapple with it for like 2 weeks, and this is the only thing we've discussed beforehand. And I've gone on a journey just trying to find my educational journey throughout this question. So I went to the professional roles and thinking, should I start there? I went to kind of my like high school journey of my professional role of working in a pizza restaurant. I thought about my college career and my grade school career and all those things combined. And whenever I thought about an event that might be the start of my journey, it kind of kept going backwards to, no surprise, everybody starts off in their childhood and how things kind of leave an imprint on you and how you evolve as a person. And for me, every single point of my journey, every single thing that where I made a pivot or I made an iteration in my career started back with this with a curiosity that was born in my childhood. And that curiosity was born out of boredom. So if I have to start my educational journey, I'd say it starts with being bored. And I'll kind of give you like a reason for that to explain it a little more so it's not confusing or you wonder why I'm saying that. But for me, I grew up in a household. I was the youngest of six kids um, with my folks. So it's eight folks together in a three-bedroom house. And so
Wow.
we didn't have a lot as far as material things, but we had a lot otherwise, a lot of love, a lot of engagement, a lot of things we could do. But you often had to make up your own um, entertainment. You had to find things to keep yourself occupied. And it was really rooted in that boredom that I started journey of just being curious and finding ways to continue to keep myself occupied, to keep myself engaged, and to just continually grow. So for us, we lived out in the country. There wasn't a neighborhood kid or a group of kids that I could play with really on a consistent basis. Um, my siblings were, I was the last one, as I mentioned, and there was an age gap between us. So they weren't hanging out with me. They weren't doing things. We didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have, VCRs or things like that in the 80s. We had a Betamax that somebody, somehow we got, and what can you do with a Betamax ever? So we didn't have educate or good entertainment options.
Yeah.
But what I did have and what was so valuable to me was my parents lived on 5 acres. And it wasn't 5 acres of just a field or just a forest or anything like that. It had different ecosystems in it, which was fantastic for a young kid who is bored and who is curious to create their own entertainment and to learn and to just get out there. So we had a field that whenever I could scrap together people, we'd play a baseball or football game, something like that. That'd be fun. We had woods where I built a tremendous amount of forts and tree houses and things like that. We had a pond, built a boat at one point. We had a stream, which is the most amazing thing for an 8-year-old boy to just go out in the stream every day after school and catch crayfish and just like learn how to do that. And he can occupy you for hours at a time. We also live next to a quarry, which you can get in a lot of trouble just, going out and exploring the quarry and things there. So it was, it seems a little odd to say to connect these things to my educational journey, but it was this kind of foundational principle of like find your own path and find things that are entertaining and can help you grow a little bit that I really point to with every single pivot and every single iteration of my journey as a student, as a professional that helped me to grow because being stagnant is not something that I enjoy. It's continuing to learn, continuing to find out the reasons why things are, or look deeper into just into my professional role so that I don't stay bored. It's bored is a state that I don't want to be in continually, but it helps drive me.
Um, Ben, thank you. That's an incredibly well. What I'll say is, as soon as you began to describe, right, growing up on these 5 acres, spending time outside, and sort of make creating your own entertainment, I immediately knew what you were talking about. I didn't grow up on 5 acres, but in the neighborhood where I grew up, I remember just being outside and uh, playing in the street. We didn't have a lot of traffic, so you could go play football or something in the street, and or there were fields around our neighborhood, and you know, there was a group of maybe four of us, and going and exploring, and like camping or and so it's just amazing what that does for you. And like you said, curiosity and being responsible for creating your own entertainment, but also kind of you didn't say this as much, but I know this is exactly what you were thinking. Being responsible for facilitating sort of your own learning. Like, let me
Yeah.
go and explore and learn this. So let me go and, right? And so learning with your friends or yeah, it's that's um thank you for taking us through that. Now, Ben, let me ask you, because I don't think you mentioned this, but where did you grow up?
I grew up in Maryland, kind of it's a much bigger town than it is now. It was called Mount Airy, Maryland. Pretty small when my folks first arrived there in the late 70s. I think there's one stoplight, and our house used to be a barn. It was a farm, so it got converted from a barn into a house. But yeah, it was not a whole lot of folks around. Certainly not a whole lot of diversity or anything like that. It was pretty far out there.
Oh, wow. Ben, you here you are, you're in a big family. What would you say were some of the earliest lessons you got, or what was the earliest messaging you got in terms of a formal education then?
That's a good question too. It was always expected that we get good or expected for me to get good grades and to go to college. Like there wasn't a question of will you do this, will you not? It was just the baseline. So there weren't a whole lot of celebrations. Oh, you got straight A's, or you made the honor roll, or whatever it was. It was just okay, you did that, and now we got other things to do. So you can continue, working around the house or whatever it is. My parents, they were kind of the first of their generation to go through college, and they instilled those values in me. And it was just always like you hit the books, you get your education, and wherever it leads, it's where it leads. My mom, being who she was, and living in that small house, she always had these dreams that she would kind of assemble a like a trade group within her children and within their spouses so they could build her a house one day. So she was always pushing me to be an architect because I was good at math. And she was trying to get the plumber angle and the electrician angle and things like that. It didn't work out that way, obviously. But yeah, it was always just kind of a set expectation that you will have this education, you will go to school, we will figure out how to make it work, but there's a level of achievement that we expect from you.
Um, you're here you are, and your mother's secretly or maybe openly hoping that you all get into the trades. What is it that you wanted to do? 10, 11, 12-year-old Ben, what were your dreams?
Yeah, it's I reflected back on this with the original question too, and it goes through iterations. And the common theme for me is I get really deep into a subject. Like I like to learn something and learn it well and go all in. And so being a young kid on those 5 acres and exploring, the land and learning about the animals and, everything there, there's something nature related, marine biologist or park ranger or something like that. I subscribed, we scraped up money so I could get Ranger Rick magazine. And I had, years worth of that. And I read it cover to cover and I would submit articles that never got accepted, but they would always, write me nice letters of rejection when I did. But yeah, earliest thing, I took a deep dive into animals, into ecosystems, and just trying to learn as much as I could. That didn't last too long. It probably through my elementary school years or so that kind of died out when I got to middle school after that. But that was the most immediate thing. The second iteration of it, after my nature journey was when I got to high school, I got just incredibly into history and that carried me for a number of years after it. But I would lobby our teachers to bring back courses that they had long since retired and nobody was taking. And I took every single history course that my high school offered. I was just absorbing as much as I could. So when I got to my teenage years, it was I'm going to be a historian and I'm going to focus on this for the rest of my life.
You said your parents were the first in their generation to go to school and go to college. So, and you said college was kind of the baseline, or at least school was the baseline. You're going to go to school. When it came time to decide, okay, I'm going to go to college, one, where did you decide, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of direction, honestly, at that point. Like I knew I wanted to, but I was all over the map as far as what school am I going to go to. So I applied, like on one extreme to Penn State, huge, giant school, thousands and thousands of kids you could get lost in. Other end of the spectrum where I ended up going was a small college in Maryland called St. Mary's College, where everybody lives on campus. There's 1,600 or so students at the time, and it's a very kind of tight knit environment. So yeah, I was all over the place. My dad influenced me to go just because of my personality to the smaller school and fitting in. I'm very introverted, so I thought that would fit me better. It's also in state because we were in Maryland, so it's cheaper. Got some scholarships to go along with it. So yeah, that's kind of how I started on the college journey. But I was still very much into history at that time. I said I'm going to do something. I'm going to be in museums or going to teach it or whatever. And I majored in history in undergrad.
The Thank you for saying that. Even you kind of like I think the guidance, right, as part of the college, applying to college and stuff, being a little lost, because I think like for folks that have never, even I think, I'm not going to date you, right? But I would say the fact that you owned a Betamax would kind of tell us kind of the era that you're growing up in. I can relate. Um, like it seems like today, looking at and helping students through that process, like the process has just gotten harder, not easier, and it's much more competitive, I think, these days. And so I think I appreciate your comment because I think regardless of where you find yourself, like as a student, but even if your parents have an education, if your parents went to college, like it's still a difficult process. It's still challenging, I think, for folks. So I appreciate that comment. You go to St. Mary's College, a very small college, um, and you major in history. Now, let me ask you, what was the transition like going from, because we didn't really speak to your high school experience, but for example, do you remember how many people were in your graduating class?
Of high school, 400 or so. So it was roughly equal to my college experience.
Wow. Was the transition difficult at all, going from your high school to St. Mary's College?
No, I don't think it was beyond kind of the traditional things of leaving home and, making new friends and that experience. I really did enjoy that. I'm grateful for my father for suggesting St. Mary's because it really did create that tight knit group, which worked for me, worked for my personality. The small classrooms too, with the professors of like being able to talk to them and have meetings after class and not we didn't have TAs or anything like that. So it was really an intimate experience. So yeah, the transition to college, it really went well for me.
When you say you describe yourself as introverted, and you said your father thought St. Mary's would be a better fit for you, what do you mean? Tell us what you were like as a high school student that your father would say maybe the smaller college would be better for you.
Yeah, yeah. So incredible. I mean, I've worked on it over the years, but incredibly introverted in my high school and grade school days. You have a group project. I'm the last one to raise my hand. You have a presentation. I'm not going up to the classroom. Oh, find an excuse. I have to go to the bathroom or something like that. And, oh, the bell rang. Sorry, I can't do it today. So that was me. And I learned, over time I have to overcome this and I have to, be more comfortable with public speaking and getting in front of crowds and everything. And so that was on my map when I went to college and I was thinking about history of like, this is something I really need to do if I'm going to succeed in life and, continue to grow. So what's the most challenging thing to do as an introvert who's afraid to speak publicly? Get in front of a group of 30 high school students every day. And I got certified in teaching part of my college experience. And I was in the high school environment as a 22-year-old teaching 16 and 17-year-old. So that'll get you, unafraid. Well, works both ways, but it gets you unafraid, but also afraid of students. I didn't last very long as a teacher, just a couple of years, but the experience of growing and being up there and be able to lead a classroom and lead a conversation and to organize events was something that I knew I had to do. Yeah, it's always interesting that the background of things of what people see in you. So the original question is how my dad kind of influenced that. He's he's on a whole different level than I am. So he's a nationally known figure. He commands meetings. He's up there, but where he saw himself in me is that he never sought out the spotlight. That's me, completely. I don't seek out the spotlight, but you don't have to be a leader. You don't have to have that to be a leader, is what I meant to say. So when you're leading and when you're commanding a room, you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. You don't have to be the one that consumes all the attention. And so that's one of the lessons that he gave to me really early on is, be comfortable in your skin, but you can still grow. So find the niche that works for you to continue to evolve and continue to to just grow professionally and grow as a person, but don't ever kind of take it too far away from who you are.
Ben, thank you for that, and thank you for kind of describing yourself. And um, I think we and not to belabor the point, but when I think about young people and advising them and helping, because I do help young people through that college application process. But I think so often we get enamored by like a big fancy school, so a large state school, like you said, Penn State's, world-renowned school, but it is a big school, incredible alumni base, right? But we become so enamored with names and with the size, in Texas, it's UT or Texas A&M. And these campuses are like cities, and it's easy, I think, for students to get overwhelmed, to get lost, to feel like they just can't find their way. So I appreciate you talking about like one that your father was kind of in tune to your own personality, and just connecting to a university, to a school like that kind of fit who you were. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And some of the bigger schools too can lure you in with the fancy things that the small schools can't. And you have to kind of really weigh that with your personality. So, I had a girlfriend at the time who went to another state school and they were bigger and they would get lobster once a semester. And we were like, I was like, wait, what? Because we weren't getting that. I'll tell you that. We they were under renovations when I was there, and we were under a tent for a while, eating out of the cafeteria. So like, yeah, there are some things that the fancy schools can entice you with, even just having a football program or
Yeah.
different facilities and things like that. And being in a small school, they couldn't do that. And I'm glad, my father's influence. I'm glad I listened to like the other benefits that weren't so apparent, that really fit with what you want to do, who you were, and kind of how you wanted to grow. So, yeah, not to knock the state schools at all or the big schools at all, they're perfectly fine for a lot of folks, but just for me, it wasn't the right fit at that time in my life.
Ben, let me ask you to speak to a little bit more about that, right? Because right, the large schools can lure you, will try to lure you away with all kinds of bells and whistles. But what would you say are the benefits of getting going and studying at a small school?
Yeah, it's really the intimate nature of it. So, both from the academic side of working with your professors, getting to know them, then getting to know you and working with you, but then also just the personal side and the social side of getting to know your classmates and the people that are going to school with you, and just having a tighter network. So, yeah, it's really just that intimacy, I think, which you can still get at a big school to a degree, but it's different. And then also for me is that, a lot of schools, they'll differ on living on campus versus off campus versus commuting, and all those iterations and how they factor in. St. Mary's was a school that everybody lived on campus for the most part. And through your senior year. So it wasn't just freshman dorm housing and then you moved off and found an apartment. It was in the middle of nowhere. So they built townhouses that you just kind of, graduated into as you got older, you got a better place to live.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Sounds like a great school. So after college, you said you became a teacher, but you said that didn't last long. So tell me about that experience. What happened there?
Yeah, it's God bless all the teachers out there. You do a wonderful job. It was not my career path for me. I learned a ton out while I was doing it. But really it came down to classroom management and being so young in my career that age gap, which was really tiny at the time, and just also being a young professional, you have so much to learn. It didn't work out. I stayed 2 years teaching high school civics and world history, and I learned a ton there, and it was my springboard into other things. But the workload of a teacher is tough. It is incredibly difficult. The things that you have to deal with because you go in, with this idealistic scenario of I'm gonna inspire every kid and they're gonna love the subject that I'm teaching and they're gonna want to grow up and be history teachers too. And that's not the way it's going to work out, and for most people, and if not all people, but you do have that kind of idea that, they're going to love coming to your classroom. And so like I would always try to instill it at the beginning of my classes. I would start off with, "Hey everybody, it's a great day for civics." Oh, did I lose you? You still there? Okay, my window pop up. Sorry. I would start off with, "Hey everyone, it's a great day for civics," or "It's a great day to learn about world history," and just kind of set off the meeting or the class experience that way. But kids are kids. They do, kids things. Not everybody's interested in your subject, and the classroom management side of it, got to weigh on me after a while. And even just when you're first teaching a subject, the planning for it, the grading takes a lot longer than it will your third, fourth, fifth year down the line. So that initial kind of ramping up of being a teacher is difficult for everybody, but I learned early on that this is probably not where I want to be for my whole career. And I used it as a pivot point. So once I decided to leave teaching, I still loved education. I still loved history. I decided, well, what can I do with that? And I found an online curriculum company, just when e-learning was starting to take off. And I started writing the history lessons and writing the civics lessons and doing all that. So still the education portion of it, being able to do that, but without the classroom management. So that was my next pivot in my career that I took.
You thank you for sharing that. And I'd like to explore that space. You know, stepping into that space because I think you're writing curriculum, right? And you're doing some curriculum writing, I'm sure, as a high school teacher, as a teacher. Um, Before we go there, one question that I have that as a professional, and I think this is regardless of the kind of field you get into, when did you know? When did you realize, you know what, maybe I need to pivot?
Yeah, there wasn't like a single moment, but I think when when other aspects of your life start to not be as good as they can be, is when you start to realize my professional role needs to change. So if you're not sleeping as much, if you're stressed out on the weekends, if you don't have the time to do other things that you want to do that fill your cup up, being an introvert, you need that time to recharge and to do the other things.
Yeah.
That became apparent to me pretty quickly, and then I gave it the first year, and I said, okay, I'll try again the second year and see if I fine-tune some things, or it's easier because I have some lesson plans to at least base my curriculum off of. And I gave it another try, and it worked out the way it did. I decided this isn't for me, but I think that's a common thing for a lot of folks when you start to see the satisfaction with the job. Everybody's job's not perfect all the time, but when you start to see it impact other aspects of your life, that's when you decide a pivot's needed and a change is needed.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out because I think you sometimes um we kind of we and I don't know that this was the case for you, but I've heard from other guests where they find themselves in a career in a field and maybe things aren't going well. They're experiencing exactly just what you described, but are reluctant to pivot or are reluctant to leave because the fear that I might not find another job, I might not land on my feet. Who knows how long it'll be. When you decided to transition out and you take this role writing curriculum, how much was there much of a gap?
No, I was fortunate. So I made the decision probably in the winter semester of my last year and started looking for jobs, and found one that lined up for the June, July period, right when teaching would end. So I was very lucky in that sense. But yes, it's that factors in tremendously, especially at the point of your career that you're in. So early career folks probably have more entry level jobs or more opportunities to find the next thing. But somebody older, not older, but more experienced, more seasoned in their career, that might be at a different pay level or different just opportunity. It is harder. There's not as many jobs at whatever level you want, the further up you get in your career. So that certainly comes in play. Family comes into play too. Like if at the time when I switched teaching, it was just me. I was a bachelor. I didn't have to worry about providing for folks. If I had to eat ramen noodles every night, so be it. But today I have a family, I have a wife, I have a daughter, like there's costs that come with pivoting and changing. And you recognize that as your career goes on, like there's other things that are bigger than you that you have to kind of factor into every decision that you make.
So Ben, are you telling me that you couldn't go and eat ramen noodles every night now?
I don't know. Your body changes too as you get older, so it doesn't accept the things that you once put in it. So yeah, ramen noodles every night for me are probably not good. I don't think my primary care would say it's good for my blood pressure either.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think so. So, how much time did you spend writing curriculum?
That was about 6 years. And that leads to kind of the next pivot point in my career. I really enjoyed it. I loved getting in, writing the lessons, coming up with like interesting angles that from my classroom experience as a teacher, I thought the kids would enjoy as well. A little bit of a different spin on the history lessons or the geography or the civics or whatever I was producing at the time. And so as I started enjoying this a lot, kind of coupled back with what I talked about earlier of me really diving into subjects when I dove into them, I thought like what is the next iteration of my career and how can I further my studies because I'm enjoying this so much. So I went back to school, got my master's in instructional design. How to and instructional design for folks that don't know is kind of how to set up learning opportunities for folks so they can get the most out of it. So you go into a subject area where you are not an expert, and probably more often than not, you do know nothing about it, but you get really intense, learn about it, and figure out the best way to teach others about it as quick as possible. And so for me, just being curious, back to the earlier question, being real intense about things, I thought this is the perfect thing for me because I can learn about so many things it'll give me, personal fulfillment, and it's also an income as well. And so that's how I pivoted into instructional design. But I was doing that while I was writing curriculum.
So you're writing curriculum, you decide to go back to school because again, you're getting in you deep into this stuff. You go into curriculum design, and then what came next for you?
Layoff. Got laid off. So yeah, the curriculum company, I was not ready to leave at the time that I left, but we got bought out by a bigger competitor. And they were based in Minnesota, and they gave me the opportunity to either come to Minnesota and live my life there or find something else. And so, at the time I was engaged and I wasn't leaving Maryland or the DC area, and decided to pivot. So I had this instructional design, this master's degree. I had been kind of putting out feelers for a different role because I knew I needed something else to continue to grow. But that made it go into overdrive. When you don't have an income and you're about to get married, you got to find something. And so I was looking at kind of adult education fields because that was interesting. I wanted to kind of move away from the more K through 12 environment and get into adult ed. And there were a lot of opportunities there. I was very fortunate that when I got notice I was getting laid off, they gave us about 2 months or so to figure things out. So it wasn't immediate, pack the box and get out the door, and security will escort you on your way out. They did give us a little bit of time to get things together. So I was able to submit resumes, go out there, and in the DC area, what you can do with an instructional design is basically two things, two big things. One is government contractor work. So the defense contractors out there, and then the people working for the government, for the federal government, to design education around specific government processes or procurement or other things like that. And so I had offers in that area. But then in the other area, I had one offer was for an association. And that's how bring us back to Carlos and the other folks that you talked to in the association space. It was for an association for an oncologist. So curing cancer, treating cancer, very mission-based organization to help people and to help doctors be the best that they can be in their field. And so it was a no-brainer for me. I could probably enjoy this government contractor work, but as a personal fulfillment type of thing of giving back to the community and giving back to society, it was the association work. And I fell in love with associations after that. So mission-based groups that could use my education background, that could let me educate, but also serving a bigger purpose.
Ben, the in these conversations, primarily with folks in Carlos and folks within your network, I have been fascinated by the world of associations because I think, and it's this is the message that I share with students all the time is, a lot of young people have tunnel vision, right? They've got one idea of something that they're going to do, and and we've convinced kids that they're going to do something for the rest of their lives, which is not true, right? But the association world is something that is was new to me, and in speaking to all of my guests has been incredibly fascinating because I think there's opportunities to fill so many roles and to do so many things within these spaces. So whether it's often mission driven, right? But also there's this professional development, these professional development opportunities. There are these organizational development. And so tell us about the work that you do and where did you sort of, how did you carve out a niche in this space?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. So taking my previous experience of writing curriculum online and teaching, professional development is a core area of most associations, not all, but to train their members to help them be better in whatever field that they're at. So e-learning was still kind of exploding at this point when I joined the association, where a lot of people were exploring it and doing new that I knew out to teach oncologists at first how to the latest cancer treatments and the latest ways to treat this particular disease and the advancements in the field because it's always changing and they it's their benefit and especially their patients benefit to be up to date on the most current treatments and that they're following the protocols. So I carved out that niche of professional development, initially e-learning, kind of later moved into the live training space as well. So I think your conference thing like that. But that's really been the area that I focused on is professional development, whatever association I'm at. I've been at three now, to help their members be the best that they can be. And so like, and it kind of goes back to your question too, originally, like when did your education journey start? Where for a lot of folks, one chapter, maybe it's not the start, but one chapter in the professional development and the education journey is when they join an association because you go through school, you get your degree, but things change and the world changes, and associations are there to really help train up workforces and educate workforces for that changing environment. So again, for oncologists, it was the latest cancer treatments. Where I'm at right now, it's the School Nutrition Association, which covers, it's a national association that is for all the school nutrition professionals across the country in the K through 12 environment. So anybody that's serving food within a school environment can be our member, is invited to be our member, and I provide professional development for them because it is a very highly regulated environment. I don't think you'd realize that, and being from the outside, I certainly didn't, of how
Yeah.
much goes into just putting food on students' plates in the lunch line and all the regulations and rules that they have to go through in order to do that.
Wow. Wow. You was it, because the way you described it and that transition, that first transition and working with oncologists and providing that learning, did did you were you intimidated
Oh
stepping
yeah.
into that space?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. You would read, you open up the paper one day and read oncologist so and so finds this treatment or, solving this thing. And the next day I'm on a call with them and I can't pronounce half the words that are, the drugs that they're administering or the different things they're doing. So yes, it would be crazy from day to day, just some of the interactions that I would have with folks, these world-renowned people from Memorial Sloan Kettering and all those types of places that you hear in the news, and they would have meetings with me and we would go through an educational course of this is how we're going to design it. And I'm in my late 20s, early 30s at that point, and I'm dictating to them how to do things. Like these masters of their subject domain, I'm saying this is how you're going to design this course for folks so they can understand it. So it's like, and it's very intimidating, like you said, but also empowering in the moment that you are an expert in your field, even if it's not this gigantic thing, oncology. They look to you to be an expert and in creating the education.
Wow. Wow. The for a lot of students, and not just students, I think even for professionals, right? We hear about imposter syndrome and we hear about being in these spaces, stepping into a space. And in fact, I had a conversation with some students today about it. But stepping into this space, knowing that I can do this, but there is that little bit of doubt. How did you reassure yourself? How did what did you tell yourself to kind of to find um well, like I said, to maybe to overcome those thoughts?
Yeah, it's there's no one single answer, I would say, but I think it's a process and you have to kind of continually check yourself and remind yourself of what you bring to the table. So going back to those oncologists for an example, brilliant people, PhDs, they're solving cancer, they're finding the latest treatments, they're doing all this research, but they can't turn on a computer sometimes, or they don't know how to write an email. Like there are things that you can do really well better than them. And so
Yeah,
everybody has their thing that they're not good at. Everybody has something that they could improve upon.
yeah.
And you always have something to offer. You always have that ability to make somebody else better. And, as an educator, I recognize that. And that helped me, see the value because I could always help somebody else out with something. And so, that's one way of getting over imposter syndrome that I've experienced.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Ben, for sharing that perspective. Um, Ben, it sounds like you've found this work incredibly rewarding and certainly a space you probably never saw yourself in, looking back and throughout your journey. Um, as we, I if somebody, if you, because these association spaces, like I said, they offer, I think, so much. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for folks to work in these spaces and to contribute in these spaces. Who would you say, who these spaces, like, who are the ideal candidates for these spaces,
In the
would you say?
association world.
Yeah, in the association world.
What, as like a person working with an association?
Yeah, within the association.
It's that's a good question too, because it's really anybody. I mean, you've got the professional development folks like me, but every association needs marketing, communications, or not every, but a lot of associations are heavy in the advocacy field, so lobbying the government. Um, there's business development because although you're a nonprofit, you still have to make money and keep the lights on.
Yeah,
So there's all sorts of different ways. I think the core thing is going back to that mission-based work. So you're not going to get paid always the best within an association role, but if one of your values and one of the things that you want to do is leave leave work at the end of the day and feel like you've contributed something back, something that's
yeah,
mission-based, something that's bigger than you, that's something that draws in a lot of association folks. But I will say also, aside from working in an association, I'll put a little plug in just for being a part of an association.
yeah,
There is an association for everything. So whatever your job is, whoever's listening to this, there is an association for that if you're not, if you don't know it. And personally speaking, I'm in associations. There's an association for associations. And I didn't really recognize the value of being a member and being a part of a community that shares experiences that are similar to yours until I really got involved in my own association as a member of that for other association professionals. So I was doing the work, I was being, rising up the ladder and doing all those things to grow professionally. But for me, a really pivotal point in my career is when I decided to start raising my hand and being involved as a member of my own association and getting involved with those folks. And one thing leads to another. It leads to this conversation here today. And I met Carlos, who we are on a board together. It's called Association Latinos, which tries to advance Hispanics within the association space. He led me to you. There's a whole bunch of other things that happen once you start getting involved. So, from the personal, like professional side of just being an association member, can't plug it enough. Whatever your field is, look out for that association because there's people like you that are going through the similar experiences that you are, and it really creates a network and a community that you will find hard to replicate if you're just kind of insular within your own organization.
yeah. It sounds like, would you say, are you still as much an introvert as you were when you were a young high school student, college student, or would you say your work now, the association work? I mean, you alluded to it, you pointed out that being a teacher, getting in front of a classroom of students helps with that. But have you found that you're, I think you've come out of your shell a little more in this role within the association?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's by force. You just have to do it if you want to advance. But I'm still very much an introvert after I have a public speaking engagement or a big meeting or whatever it is. I'll need that quiet time at home, kind of recharge myself, do all my things. So it's still there, but
Yeah.
I mean, you grow as a person and you find ways to evolve. And public speaking is one of the things I had to do. So yes, I'm still an introvert to answer your question, but I hope I can get up here and fake it a little bit and be interesting on podcasts and other talks as needed.
Well, you've got a great story, Ben. I appreciate your time today. So thank you. And thank you for I think your honesty, your candidness, for carefully, I think, walking us through, but also talking about, I think, your own personality and sort of your traits and sort of finding those spaces that not only I think fit the personality, but also allowed you to grow and develop as a professional. before we transition out, right? Another thing that I always ask my guests for is one last piece of advice. So I don't know who the audience is going to be, who you want to tailor this to, but if you wanted to leave our listeners with one last piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Another good question. I mean, how many different directions could I go in for this? But just continuing along with, I guess, the theme that we just had would be, know your core values. Don't try to deviate too far from them. Find, what works for you and certainly grow and kind of push yourself, but don't try to be something that you're not. So if you're meant for a small school, go to a small school. If you're meant for a big school, do that. If you're an introvert, find the ways to still be successful and still do all the things you need to do without burning yourself out. Because I've done that too, of trying to go too far against my personality traits, and it didn't work out in the end. So yeah, just be true to yourself. Find that continual education journey. It doesn't end with college. It continues on, and yeah, just continue to evolve. Be bored, and then be curious after it.
I love that. Be bored and then be curious. I think that's going to be a quote that'll end up somewhere with for the podcast. Ben, thank you again for your time today,
I
and thank you
appreciate
for
it.
your
Thank you for
story.
having me.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Um, you know, one invitation that I would like to share is, as I've spoken to more folks within the association space, I would love to maybe get a couple of folks together to talk about what it means to be a professional. So whether it's being a part of an association, but even just because I think for one thing that when I that I a lesson that I think I share with a lot of my students is we get the messaging about going to college or even learning skills that'll help you be a good employee, a good professional. But nobody tells us about what to do in the middle, right? How to get there. And for a lot of the folks that I do interview, that transition from being the student into the professional always seems to be a tricky one. And so I'd love to put together maybe it's a couple of conversations, but a special episode of the podcast where folks talk about that and what can folks do to prepare themselves for that transition post college as they make the transition, or maybe even mid career and they find themselves, recognizing I need a pivot and well, how do I do that? So I think you've got some wonderful experiences. I think you'd be a great voice to add to that conversation. So I'm going to extend the invitation. You don't have to give me an answer now, but please think about it. Okay.
I mean, I would love it. Everything you said, plus there's so many points in your career when it's maybe not a pivot, but an evolution or like a jump up. So you go from an individual contributor to a leadership role, and like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, how do I was really good doing things on my own, but how do I make other people or, convince other people to do these same things and move along? So yes, it is a journey. There's so many different points there, where that reflection is needed.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Ben, thank you. Thank you very much again. Uh, this concludes another episode of the Way to College podcast. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to our listeners and viewers out there. Please remember to subscribe, rate, follow, all of that good stuff. And don't forget to share the podcast with one other person. I'd appreciate it. And thanks, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.